Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we have a fun topic, I hope. I'm gonna be telling you about the 6 mistakes that I wish I never did. Now recently I got an email from Orchid here on YouTube tagging me to do the Orchid tag video, which is a popular type of video to make. You might have seen other YouTubers making it. As you might suspect, I'm not a fan. It's just not for me. So I'm not gonna do the tag, but thank you for tagging me. I'm gonna link her channel down below in the description. She has lovely orchids and she's Australian. Who doesn't love the Australian accent? I do, it's my favorite accent. However, one of the questions in this tag is related to a topic that I do have on my list on my phone here. I was waiting to make it, and since I got the email, we're just gonna do it today. So of course we're gonna talk about mistakes. Now, before we start, let me tell you a little secret. I actually don't really regret anything that I did with my orchids, not even the mistakes, not even the big ones. And this is because I'm in a very fortunate position to have an audience, to put information out there that can potentially help others. So even though these things had a negative outcome for me, I'm just one single person. If I choose to put them out there, I can inspire people to not make these mistakes, to do things better, to spread the word. In the end, a positive outcome for more people, right? So this is how I look at things. I'm not losing sleep about any of these mistakes, but there is a little part of me which is more selfish and thinks, oh yeah, if I never did that, things would be so much better. So today, let's go through the list that I compiled and learn from my mistakes. Alrighty, so mistake number 1, not rinsing and disinfecting, of course, orchid roots when I repotted new orchids. About 7 or 8 years ago, I wasn't yet on YouTube, but I was on a local forum. And back then, the norm was to never actually rinse off orchid roots because we were destroying these really helpful microorganisms. And orchid setback, orchid failures were mainly blamed on the destruction of these microorganisms. So everybody was advising people not to rinse off orchid roots, let alone hydrogen peroxide and things of the sorts. No, you just did not touch orchid roots. And of course, that's what I was advised, that's what I did. And oh boy, in a very short while, I had myself an outbreak of bush snails, amongst other things, such as molds and mushrooms and other things, but the worst were the snails. Now the bush snail, funny little creature, kinda cute, but it likes to munch on fresh new roots. And you can imagine that if you didn't get rid of the snail, pretty much you would lose the orchid. And I did lose a few orchids, one of which I really loved, the Bellara Smile Airy. I finally got one from my friend this year, but yeah, I was really sad for losing it. So here's where the topic of this video relates a little bit to the orchid tag. Of course, somebody on that forum told me to not rinse the roots. And do you know that episode of Seinfeld where Jerry goes, "Newman," all the time? No. That's how I was for the longest time with this person. But you know what? The thing with orchid advice is that the vast majority of it out there is not malicious actually. Half of it is people really believing that what they do is okay and actually doing it themselves. Many of the times it actually works, sometimes it doesn't work because we just have different environments, different lifestyle, different products. Doesn't mean the advice is bad. And half of it is just wrong information being propagated without checking it, which is lazy, but again, not malicious. So I learned to let go of these types of, oh, bad advice stuff and learn to filter information much better, do background checks of people who deliver this information, who is more credible, who has more proof out there, and so on and so forth. And as you know from my channel, I did make up my own rules. I forgot about the forum, and that was that. But the lesson to be learned here, there are actually 2 lessons. 1, don't blindly follow advice. Even though it's not bad advice, it might not apply to you, and it might just be advice propagated because people heard it somewhere, but it's not actually tested. And second, always rinse orchid roots. And if you have issues with the bush snail, use hydrogen peroxide 3%. I'll link you to more videos down below that talk more about the use of hydrogen peroxide. And my friends, needless to say, ever since I started to make up my own rules, I didn't have any more issues with the bush snail, the molds, the mushrooms, and things of the sorts. But because I lost that beautiful orchid, sometimes I wonder, what if I did things differently, you know? Mistake number 2, and this one I cannot pinpoint on anybody. sharing water. When you first learn how to water orchids, it kind of comes natural that you can actually reuse the water that runs through one pot. But the thing is, when you do that, you spread whatever that particular pot had. And back in the day, I had snails, amongst other things. So not only did I manage to spread the snail issue that I had, but I also managed to spread other bad things in the medium. I'm not entirely sure if at the time there were people who didn't share water, but after realizing what I did, I completely stopped sharing water because the impact was so big. I really struggled with snails for a year. Nothing was working. I tried it all, and every time I mention snails, somebody tells me, try this. Trust me, I tried everything. Within a year, I had time. So it was such a stressful period for me, and I think my videos back then were always complaining about snails. I felt bad for people having to listen to me, but it was so big that ever since, I'm just not sharing water. The only orchids that I sometimes share water, not really now, but I did share water, was the Vandas, because I used to water them in the bucket, but they were a very restricted group of orchids. They didn't have media. It was fairly safe. Other than that, all of my collection and all of my setup is based on not sharing water. Even in organic media, because I use moss, I can actually still water like I did. Whatever's left here in the tray will be absorbed by the moss, will be gone in one day. I live in a warm climate. I do flush my orchids periodically so that I avoid salt buildup. I'm also careful when I fertilize, so there is no danger of buildup, and I can go ahead and just water with just a little bit of water every single orchid, and I know that that moss will just spread it around. And if you look through my archive, you will see that everything that I tried to do revolved around not sharing water. I do have another mistake that I want to share with you with sharing water. So that's, I think, the number one thing that I have in my mind when I try to make a setup. Do I need to use too much water? Will this be economical? Can I actually water each individual orchid without sharing a bath of water? If yes, then I'll do the setup. If no, then I won't do the setup pretty much. So lesson number 2, if you have a few orchids, I would suggest that you don't reuse the water. Just because I had some issues with sharing water doesn't mean everybody will, but think about statistics. You never know if you're gonna be part of the statistics or not. The chance is always there. And it's easy when you don't have a lot of orchids to just water them separately. If you have a lot of orchids, then maybe think of setups that don't require you to share the same bath for all of your orchids. And if you do have to share water, if you do have to be economical, if you cannot do it any other way, if you cannot use moss, if you cannot use self-watering, blah blah, then group your orchids. Use a bath for a particular group and another bath for a particular group. If anything happens to a group, you know that that thing that spread only spread to that group, not everything. But of course, this is your choice. There are people who do share water with everybody and nothing happens for years, and then one day something happens, or nothing actually ever happens. It is a lottery in the end, and you have to decide for yourself if you're gonna participate in the lottery. I was the very, very, very unlucky one who managed to win the lottery very early on when I didn't know much about orchids, and it took me totally off guard. I didn't know what to do about it for an entire year, so it made a very big impact on me. Doesn't mean it will happen to you, but if you can, do try to limit water sharing, because you never know if you're gonna be the next winner. Okay, time to move on to more recent times. Mistake number 3, moving to a new location without having all of the supplies ready. If you remember, when I moved countries, when I came here, my orchids have sat on a tarp for 2 or 3 weeks, awaiting the arrival of the medium. You know how the post offices usually specify how many days a package takes to arrive in a certain country? Well, don't ever believe that. The world is full of lies, and the post office is full of lies as well. I'm being a little melodramatic here, but it's true. What happened was the shipment, which was supposed to take a week to 10 days, actually took 3 whole weeks or a little more until it arrived to my destination. And this is because, well, that's how we do things between Germany and Cyprus. We take a long time to deliver things. Did I know this? No. Did the post specify that it would take so long? Nope. And yet it happened. As an outcome, my orchids were super stressed. They were dehydrated. Many of them lost all of their roots. It wasn't a good time. But in the end, if you think about it, why did I actually move without having the supplies first? Well, I know why, but I shouldn't have done it. So lesson number 3, if you plan to move, if you plan to completely change your setup or do a massive change in your life and in your orchid collection, do make sure that you have all of the supplies ready, because orchids are not like other plants, we all know this, but when they get setback, it takes years to recover from the setback if it is severe enough. And being without proper and adequate watering is a really big cause for setback. So this is one of the easy ones. Just make sure you have all of the supplies ready whenever you want to make a big change, a big move, and you have a lot of orchids. The setback is just not worth it. Mistakes 4 and 5 are related, but I will separate them. Number 4. I switched all of my collection to a brand new medium that I didn't really use all that much way before. Now, the circumstances were like this. Either I move all of my orchids and I commit to bark, which is what I was using, what I knew, and stick with it for at least 2 years, or move everybody into this new medium, which I was fairly confident will work. Turns out it didn't really work as I expected, but anyway, so it was a 50-50 decision. Either I spend the same amount of money or maybe even more, I guess, on bark and do whatever I was doing until now, or take a leap of faith and do something that I think will work, spend the same amount of money or even a little less, but discover something great. Well, I chose the second one because I'm adventurous like that. But now in retrospect, I can tell you that it's not a good idea to do these super major changes when you're not sure what you're working with. So even though I don't really regret it, the medium itself wasn't a huge problem for me. I still have it. It turns out I don't enjoy working with it so much, but as it turns out, it is working, and I do know of at least one YouTuber who still uses Ceramis, because yeah, we're talking about Ceramis here. So in the end, yeah, it had a positive outcome kinda, because some people discovered Ceramis and love it. A little negative outcome for me because Ceramis has some difficulties in this climate. It dries out way too fast, but what doesn't in this climate? Anyway, I didn't take into account many things that had to do with the climate, and I took a leap of faith. In retrospect, I wouldn't advise anybody to do that, and whenever you're in the position to change all of your collection, I wouldn't suggest you change everything to something new. If you want to try out something, try it with 1, 2, 3 orchids, but not with all of your collection. So yeah, thinking about it, I did have a 50-50 choice. Everybody was bare rooted anyway, but I didn't really take into account how much different this climate could be. Not only did I move houses, but countries and climates as well. And that was a little bit too much. I didn't account for it. And if I were to do it again, I would not do that. I would try Ceramis separately, because now I have such a bad experience with it that I don't want to see it. Side note though, remember that I want to try some Rupiculus Lelias? Yeah, that might mean some revival of Ceramis, because everybody on the internet says those orchids do better in rocky media or rocky situations because they're litophytes. So do I want to play it safe and use rocks and Ceramis because Ceramis does hold on to moisture, or do I want to go the route of bark? I don't know. It might be the route of Ceramis. I didn't throw it away. So we'll see about that. But yeah, lesson number 4, stick to what you know and do experiments on a few orchids, not all of them. If you're pressured by the circumstance, that is that. But if you're not, do always stick to what you know. Mistake number 5 is similar, but it has to do with pots. When I moved here, I got myself a whole bunch of clay pots because they're just so pretty, and you have quite a few YouTubers and quite a few growers using clay pots, and you see all of these beautiful pictures on the internet with clay pots. They're so classy until you work with them. Now, clay pots are wonderful for certain people in certain climates. What's not wonderful about them is that they can actually dry out pretty fast. For my climate, it's a no-no. You might know that I'm using osmosis water here, and I am in a position where I need to be quite economical with water because I'm already losing water with producing osmosis water. In the first year with the clay pots, things were okay because my orchids lost all of their roots, so they didn't have much roots, not a lot of growth going on. But in the second year, when everything was ready to grow, my clay pots were drying in 2 days in the middle of summer. So I was in a position where my osmosis water wasn't enough, where I had to let it run all of the time, where I was losing water and I wasn't economical. And moreover, I just didn't have the time of day and the energy to take care of all of these orchids and their watering needs, because the clay pots were just transpiring too much water. And to make the story complete, the clay pots do produce some algae and mold on them because they are wet, they're porous, they retain water. They're just like ceramics. So salt stains and algae stains, they look good in pictures with filters on Instagram, but in reality, they're slimy. I don't like them. And having to wash 150 or 200 orchids, no, I was already working too much with watering them. I just couldn't cope with everything, so I decided to go back to my plastic pots, which I didn't bring with me, but I asked mom to send them to me. So all of the plastic pots that I used for all of these years, I still have them, I still use them. I don't have the habit of actually throwing stuff away because you never know when you're gonna use them. So yeah, I'm back to the orchid pots and they work much, much better for me. So this is a case of somebody advising you to use clay pots because they're porous and orchids are epiphytic, most of them, they like air, and that's perfect, that's great, and I'm sure that it works great for many, many people. But in certain circumstances, they just don't fit. And that's just the reality of things. It's not a bad product, not bad advice, just incompatibility with what surrounds you. Clay pots are still around, and currently I have a big pile downstairs for all the neighbors and everybody to just take, because I cannot use the clay pots in this climate and I don't have enough neighbors to use all of my clay pots. So lesson number 5, again, if you want to change the pot, the setup, do try it out with 1, 2, 3, 4 orchids, not everybody. I don't know why I'm holding on to this, because even changing the pot of your orchid can have a very, very big impact. And just because it does work for somebody doesn't mean it will work for you as well. And it has nothing to do with bad products, bad advice, bad whatever. It just has to do with incompatibility. It's a reality that we have to accept. And finally, mistake number 6, which is a weird one. So a little background on me, if you're new to my channel, I have a phobia of insecticides and any substance that is toxic, and I need to spray it and create vapors. I don't like it. I have a major phobia on it, but when I moved here, I had a serious infestation of spider mites. I was battling it for 2 years already. I could not get rid of them. The false spider mite, by the way, not the one that creates webs. That's a piece of cake. The red one, not so much. So I decided when I arrived here, since my orchids were not potted and since this was a brand new room without spider mites, I decided to go the route of insecticides because I thought I had no other choice. So what I did was I arranged a place on my terrace, me and my boyfriend, to spray my orchids with the only substance that was permitted here in this region to use as a miticide. As it turns out, to use many substances, you actually need licenses. So this one was open to the public, and it's the only one. And I actually went to the Ministry of Agriculture here to find out information. It was a whole ordeal, but anyway, playing around with insecticides, not as easy everywhere in the world. So I got my insecticide, I created a space on the terrace. The problem was it was springy when I moved here, and here in the spring it's so incredibly windy. So we had to kind of fence out the terrace a little bit with improvised tarps or something of the sorts. It was a hassle. Me and my boyfriend got masks, got equipment, protection gear. We started to spray. It was windy. It was just a mess. And on top of everything, I was terrified. I'm telling you guys, I do have a phobia with that. I don't know why. So I was terrified. I remember I was spraying and like crying and just not believing the situation in which we were in. We were spraying a bunch of plants and it was horrible. And why? I don't know. So we did that. We did it twice because that's how you need to spray, and then pause because pests can actually develop resistance. And because it was so windy, what we opted to do at some point, because it was just unbearable anymore, we put the insecticide in a bucket and we dunked all of the orchids. Remember, they were bare rooted, so yeah, we could dunk them. And everybody got a big dose of insecticide, But also I shared water and I spread one of the most horrible stuff that ever happened to my collection. This was Fusarium. I don't talk about it way too often nowadays. There are other channels which talk about it more than me. I took an active decision not to talk about it anymore because there was too much spotlight on my channel at the time from people that I wasn't really expecting, and I didn't like it. I didn't like how I was treated anyway. I decided to take care of it in private and, one day talk about it. So yeah, I spread Fusarium, which is a fungal infection that can take away your orchid. And being on the background of orchids without medium, dehydrated, stressed, change of environment, I caught them at their lowest and I spread the disease, and I lost almost half of my collection of orchids. Some orchids were more affected than others. I lost most of the Oncidiums. So I think the Dunkin' in the bucket situation, which I did with most of my orchids, coupled with all of that stress, led to the outcome of losing half of my collection. Would I ever do it again? Absolutely not. And even if I don't really regret it because, good things happened afterwards, I was more motivated to find a solution to spider mites because, it didn't work. The spider mites, some of them had resistance already to abamectin, which was the substance that I could use. So I was forced and motivated like I never was to find a solution for them, and I did. Links down below if you missed it. Nowadays, I'm spider mite free. If I happen to see a little outbreak, I'm like, you have no power here, like the movie says. So I'm okay now, but it was horrible at the time. So lesson to be learned here: don't share water if you don't have to. And if you really, really feel you shouldn't do something, then don't do it. Even though it might just be in your head. I'm willing to admit that this phobia that I have, it's not justified, maybe, but it is there and I cannot do anything about it, and it gave me a horrible, horrible experience. So if you feel so strongly about anything, just don't do it. There are always workarounds, and if you didn't find the workaround yet, then maybe you need to give it a little bit more time. As I was saying, I found the workaround against insecticides, I found the oils. So that was my list for today. I hope you guys learned something, enjoyed the idea, enjoyed the video, and yeah, with that said, I hope you have a great weekend. I'll share with you in the description videos related to the subject of today, and you know the drill: like or dislike this video below, subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid subjects, and if you wish to support the channel, do consider visiting the merch store down below. With that said, I'll see you guys next week or sooner. I am full of surprises. Bye!